Gollum kind of is still part of me, so I can't really include him in the conversation of, you know, what's my favourite character. Gollum will never go away. He's sort of in my skin. Topsy-Turvy. So this was a Mike Leigh film called Topsy-Turvy about Gilbert and Sullivan, who were a composer and writers of very popular operettas. They were the first sort of like popular musical forms, actually. So I was playing the character called John Dauban, who was the Savoy choreographer. He choreographed all of their operas. Now, when you work with Mike Leigh, you work with him you don't just get given a script and then you play the character. You work with him and develop the character over the course of... We had 9 months of rehearsals for this. Part of what I had to do, even though it finally never even turned up in the movie, was I learnt to play the violin entirely from scratch to a proficient sort of degree, because it might have been used. I learnt the choreography for every one of their operas, and there were about 15 to 20 of them.
3 little maids from school,
and rising slowly, and
3 little maids who all unweary.
thank you very much.
And then you come to shoot the scenes, and of course you're not given a script, and so you do these long, you know, you're in character for hours and hours and hours of every day. And classic Mike Leigh is that you don't know how many days you're going to end up actually shooting, and then you get called in and you start shooting a scene, and you don't know how long that's going to be for. So after 9 months of rehearsal, I remember I only actually shot that character for 2 days, which is the most I've ever spent on developing a character for so little time in front of the camera. It was a real extraordinary time. I wouldn't have missed it for the world. But you think, wow, I could have shot 3 movies in the time of creating that, you know. The Lord of the Rings trilogy. I mean, Lord of the Rings was obviously a big turning point in my career, because it not only was it the creation of Gollum, the character of Gollum, but it was the beginning of a long journey that is ongoing, using motion capture technology, which is now, of course, called performance capture technology. Peter Jackson, one of the things he wanted to set out to do was he said to me, look, no, you could never cast an actor to play Gollum. You just can't cast someone that we could actually film. We would never be able to find that person. So we're going to use this. We're going to manifest him on screen as a CG character, but we want an actor to be there, present, for firstly to act opposite the actors playing Sam and Frodo, so they're not having to imagine it. Because of course, this was during a time where normally CG characters were put in afterwards and actors had to act against the tennis ball on a stick. But because of the way that the relationship of Gollum to the other 2 characters work, he's often driving the scenes, he's often, you know, tearing them apart, the dynamics, he's very interactive with them, and so there was no way that would work if they had to imagine what this other character was thinking. When we started to work on the film, this technology was sort of to one side, because the first part of the process of playing Gollum was acting on set with my fellow actors on location. In fact, the very, very first day I ever shot on Lord of the Rings was the last part of the 3rd movie where Gollum is leading Sam and Frodo up into Mount Doom, and that was, you know, because the principal photography for all 3 films took place together. So we shot all of the films together over the course of a year and a half. So to come in and do, I think it was like scenes 862 or something like that. It was like right at the end of the show, you know, 3 films, and I'm like, wow, okay, this is where I'm starting. I'd spent a lot of time researching how I was going to play Gollum physically. I'd studied. I was very influenced by paintings by Francis Bacon and Egon Schiele and various different artists. I went through the whole of the trilogy, looking at, you know, descriptions of how Gollum moves. I based him on other sorts of animals and creatures. You know, I wanted to find something that was tangible for the power of the ring, what it meant to him. And so for me, what spoke to me was this notion of addiction, and if the ring were present in a normal person's life, what would be the most powerful thing that would control them, perhaps? And again, the way it would physically rack his body and tear him apart and make him emaciated.
We swears to serve the master of the precious.
When Peter started to watch me doing what I was doing on set, he said, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to film Andy, and that we're going to film him on set, see how, you know, copy exactly what his movements are, and then for any sort of close-up CG shots which are just going to Gollum, which aren't fully interactive with the other actors or the environment, we'll go back onto the motion capture stage and we'll shoot plates, and and Andy will act on his own in in a motion capture studio. And it was really exciting and really, really thrilling, and that was my first sort of epiphany of what performance capture could do. And then that technology evolved over the course of the 3 movies, and we were then able, in the last movie, to actually take the performance capture cameras that were in that little volume and put them actually onto the sets. 13 going on 30. It was a really moving script. It was a great cast. Jennifer Garner, Mark Ruffalo, I mean, just such terrific actors, and an amazing director, Gary Winnick, sadly no longer with us, who had a really great take on it, which is to make it, although it's such a high concept piece, you know, girl sort of becomes a 30-year-old version of herself. It sort of had this really powerful believability. She gets to work at a magazine, and I was playing the editor. And there's a sequence in it where there's a party sequence where they find that the 2 lovers finally get to kind of see each other across a crowded dance floor and come together. And I got to do the thriller dance as this kind of rather uptight editor thinks this party's going down the drain and it's all going to be a shambles. And then suddenly the party comes to life in this dance, and he relaxes and lets go, and he's quite flamboyant. And and I got to do the thriller dance and moonwalk. King Kong. So King Kong was a huge journey of discovery in lots of different ways, really. When we started working on the movie, and Peter asked me to play the role, which was right at the end of Return of the King. It was literally a moment where he said, and I was thinking, well, this is the end of my journey with performance capture. I'm going back to my job as a regular actor, and what an extraordinary experience. But I didn't really expect it to go any further, or the technology to go any further. I thought it was just really built for that. So I went about researching gorillas to great depth. I went off to Rwanda and I studied mountain gorillas. With the Diane Fossey Gorilla Fund International, and learned about their vocalizations, learned about how they behave, how they are socially, how they interact, how they beat their chests, just everything about how they were. So all this research, I'd done all this research, went back to Peter and said, look, I really want to play King Kong, unlike the 1933 version, which is what inspired Pete to make the movie, because he was such a huge fan of that movie. I think we should make him more gorilla-like than beast-like. The first period of the shoot was principal photography in the classic sense. Naomi Watts was being filmed, all her angles were being shot, and I was off camera for months, being King Kong off camera for her. And I had a gorilla muscle suit. I was placed up on ladders and podiums and scissor lifts, and to get the right eye lines where Naomi could then act opposite me. And then sometimes it would be really intimate, and we'd be really close, and she could reach up and touch my face, and that would be the equivalent of like touching Kong's nose. But the intimacy was created because we were able to really look into each other's eyes and act and properly act opposite each other. At the end of principal photography, I then did 2 months of doing all the capture for King Kong, and so what we used to do for that, I was able to have Naomi's performances, the selects of her takes that Peter was going to use for me to act against, and I would have her in a little clamshell monitor that I could literally look down, and then they were capturing my facial expressions as I was playing opposite this tiny little image of her. So it really, and I was emotionally recalling the scenes when we played them together, and so it was able to be, connective in that way. The other character I played in it was Lumpy the cook, who's this sort of kind of self-serving bit, kind of doesn't want to endanger his life in any way. He doesn't want to go and rescue Mandara because he knows it's going to all end in trouble. Peter wanted to recreate this famous scene which was missing from the 1933 version, called the Spider Pit sequence, which was never put into the movie because people found it. Well, in fact, it was put into the movie, but then taken out because people thought it was too scary. And so Pete wanted it back in, of course, and because Pete's terrified of spiders, he wanted to, visit his fears by creating this spider pit sequence with these horrendous insects and creatures. I mean, it's really dark. I remember when we shot it, basically we had to have like 3 or 4 actors, big stunt guys in green suits who were holding my arms, holding me back, pulling me back, and then literally sort of like trying to envelop me. And sort of lumpy goes out trying to fight to the end. When I saw it in the movie, it was just like one of the most disgusting deaths I think I've ever seen on screen, which traumatised my children forever, actually. The Prestige. To work with Chris Nolan was amazing. I had always been a big fan of his work, and this script, I remember reading the script and just thinking, wow, this is an amazing story. It's beautifully crafted. The great, wonderful David Bowie was in it, and I had pretty much all my scenes with him. And so I was so excited to work with him, and he was playing Nikola Tesla, the great scientist.
These things never quite work as you expect them to, Mr. Angier. That's one of the principal beauties of science.
And David was so hilarious. I mean, he's such a comedian, and so unassuming and friendly and down to earth. It's hard to quite imagine the superstar that he is when you're in his presence, because he's very, very humble. He really made me laugh a lot, because he was doing a Serbian accent for Nikola Tesla, and he used to say, "Andy, I think my Serbian accent is a little bit like Inspector Clouseau." He really put himself. He was very self-deprecating in a very amusing way. There's a sequence which is a lot to do with these cats that are made to disappear, and you don't know where they've gone. And is it magic, or is it literally sort of transferring energy? And he had a lot of stuffed cats, and he used to puppeteer them and play with them and sort of make them come alive. And he was just great fun, and we did struggle to keep a straight face a lot of the time. Sex and drugs and rock and roll. We wanted to tell a story about Ian that wasn't a sort of and then biopic. It was like more of a snapshot of the energy of who he was, and it told in a very sort of pop art way. He was such a childhood hero of mine. I mean, he really, when his hit song "Hit Me With Your Rhythm Stick" came out, I was 14 years old, and I hadn't heard anything like it ever. It was just, it was. Everyone at school was singing it. It was just like, it was a big hit. And my first day of shooting on that was actually recording. There was the band they used to play with, which became very famous, were called the Blockheads. And they had huge hits like "Sex and Drugs and Rock and Roll," "Hit Me With Your Rhythm Stick." I mean, countless numbers. I had to record all of the songs for the show with the original Blockheads, which was one of the greatest experiences ever. And I went in there thinking, if these guys don't like me or think I'm doing a really bad impersonation of the person who's died, who was the leader of their band, I'm going to get absolutely killed here. I started off on the first song, and I could just feel them. They launched into it, and fortunately the first song didn't go too badly, and then I sort of relaxed and got into it, and they were like, by the end of it, they were like, wow, God, it's like having Ian in the room. Physically, I had to kind of learn to walk with a caliper and swing, throw the weight from my hips. I had to, I did a lot of work on one side of my body, so the other side was sort of fairly inactive. And the worst thing I did was, Ian Jury didn't have any hair on his body, and I'm quite hirsute, and I had my entire body waxed, which was, I think, the most painful thing I've ever done in my life, especially by the person who I had it done by, who'd never done it before in her life. And I just got these images of her putting hot wax on my body and then sort of pulling and yanking and then getting stuck and literally having her feet up on the bed and going, it's just like, I was raw I was literally red raw at the end of this experience. I thought, okay, I'm never doing that again. The Planet of the Apes. It's very rare that you get the opportunity as an actor to play a character all the way through from birth to death, in effect, and over the course of 3 movies, and to see every aspect of that character's life in a way condensed and telescoped into movie time. And not only that, it's not just a character kind of getting older, it's a character that's evolving. Evolving physically, evolving. His intelligence is evolving because of the drug that he was being given. I mean, it's an amazing sort of a really incredible journey for a character. So I think that's the one that really that ultimately means the most to me.
I was told you were coming. That more soldiers from the north would be joining you here.
The most difficult scene, I think, of all of all of the movies actually, was probably the final scene with Woody Harrelson's character, the Colonel, who by now at the end of the movie has contracted the disease and he is becoming mutating, and he wants to kill himself. And Caesar now has his moment where he can exact revenge after this whole journey of trying to track down the killer of his family. Everything he believes in is put into this one scene, and there's a sort of range of emotions that he goes through. And I think that was the most challenging scene that I think I've ever shot, actually, to get right. The Adventures of Tintin. We just explored sort of all different versions of filling that kind of bombastic nature of him, and yet finding moments where he can be sort of soulful and lost and sort of drifting away. So Archibald Haddock is his name. We settled on this Scottish accent because it just sort of worked really well against the fact that his ancestors were. We wanted to make a character that felt like as far away from possible from his ancestors that were more royal, if you like. So that there was a real, the fortune had been lost and the family had got sort of pushed further and further. And he ended up, they ended up migrating to Scotland, and we built a backstory for our version of Haddock.
You care about something, you fight for it. You hit a wall, you push through it.
The entire film was motion captured in a studio, so there was nothing shot on location. It was an entirely CG world. Stephen was looking through a virtual camera at all of the compositions. What he's looking at is a lit, rendered, beautifully constructed shot with live characters moving around inside it. And then what we see in the real world is actors in grey suits, head-mounted cameras, walking around a sterile environment. The Hobbit. The difference between the Lord of the Rings process and The Hobbit, which was 10 years later, was this whole journey of motion capture becoming performance capture, and by that we mean capturing the face at the same time as the body and audio all at the same time. So you only have to do it once. There's no sort of going back and repeating the process. So me acting opposite Martin Freeman, there was no going back and having to do it a second time. It was all on the location, on the amazing set that they'd built for Gollum's cave.
Lost. Where is it?
Alongside the technological advancements and the resolution of the cameras and all of that stuff, which makes the fidelity of the performance a lot stronger, is also an incredible amount of knowledge that was learnt by the animators who, over the course of 10 years, had worked on other films like King Kong, on Avatar, and Tintin. But there's also rendering changes in the way that the skin textures are rendered, and Weta, who are the most brilliant visual effects team, who created Gollum in the first film, then in the Hobbit trilogy had really mastered a sort of, how to make the skin really translucent, how light refracts off the eyeballs so that you make them much more readable and much more lifelike. The whole way an eye is constructed digitally to reflect to see the dilation of pupils and how light affects that. It all. This was all knowledge that had been built up since the first time we did it. The Last Jedi. The character of Snoke was, when I started working on it with JJ, was a really elusive, difficult, challenging part to get my head around. There wasn't really like a finished version of what he was going to be like. So it was going to really come from what we were doing, in tandem with the designers. But it was like we've got a blank canvas here. The more that we talked about it, the more that we got under the skin of it, the more, we tried out, so many different vocal qualities for him, and then it just settled down, began to simmer, and this sort of, this character that carried a lot of physical wounds.
Weakness, properly manipulated, can be a sharp tool.
There was a vulnerable look to him, and a sort of emaciated look to him, but then this malice and control and this deep hatred that sort of came out of what we were exploring, I suppose. Avengers: Age of Ultron. That role came to me in a very bizarre sort of roundabout way. At the Imaginarium, which is the motion capture studio that we have in the UK, which basically is a service-providing studio as well as a sandbox to explore the future potential of what performance capture can do in all sorts of different arenas. We worked on Age of Ultron. That was one of the first films we actually worked on, where we were assisting Mark Ruffalo to become the Hulk and doing the capture on set. Joss Whedon just turned around to me one day, and funny enough, he really was a big fan of Sex and Drugs and Rock and Roll, and he just said, "Andy, I've got an idea, and I don't know if you'd be up for it, but there's a small part in this film, but it's a really great character, is Ulysses Klaue. I really like the idea of playing this mercenary, this tough mercenary who's kind of answerable to no one, so morally ambivalent and morally reprehensible." So I said, yeah, well, I'll do it, and it was only it was a small part in Ultron, but it was a really quite nice scene.
Cuttlefish, deep sea fish, they make lights, disco lights, to hypnotise their prey.
And that then, branched into coming back into the Black Panther, which was one of the most extraordinary experiences. The Black Panther. Getting to play a character in such a groundbreaking, culturally important, really exciting energy on set. Ryan Coogler just knocking it out of the ballpark, and a great cast of actors who were all knowing that they were part of something really special. It was phenomenal, and I loved where Ryan Coogler was pushing me just to be really sort of go as far as I could with the character.
All of it. I took a tiny piece of it.
You look huge and ripped. Did you work out a lot?
I did work out a bit. Everyone says that, and I don't know what it was. I think I was helped out by the costume. Having a sort of a tight waistcoat and shirt, because I do work out. I keep fit, but I wasn't like on steroids or anything, or pumping for my life. I think a lot of it was to do with the way that I was carrying myself, I guess. Mowgli, Legend of the Jungle. I read this script and I just thought, this is a version of the story that I just haven't seen before, and it goes right to the heart of the book and the tone of the book, and that book is a lot darker, and it's a very complicated, complex journey of an outsider, of an outcast, who is trying to form as he is realizing that he is, not part of the family that he was born into. Other versions, in a way, they get very caught up in the, rightly so, as a piece of entertainment, in the antics of the animals and the, in the 1967 famous Disney animation, which we all grew up with and loved. The animals are all singing, all dancing, wonderful characters, but they seem to be at a distance from the source material. So that's why when I wanted to direct it, I wanted to kind of do a version which really delved into the Kipling world and set it in India. And also our version of the film, really a third of the last act takes place in the world of mankind, and other versions tended to avoid that.
You are the prey. Bagheera will hunt you, and if he catches you, you fail.
I wanted him to be this brusque kind of drill sergeant who was really pushing Mowgli hard for his own good, and he really represents a sort of tough love, rather than a sort of all singing, all dancing, hippie-ish kind of honey-eating bear. Animal Farm. we're making it with Netflix, and we have a wonderful cast lined up to do it. We're in the middle of writing at the moment and refining the script, and that we'll be shooting it around about, probably, hopefully, this time next year.